Hello, good afternoon, or indeed good evening, or even morning, depending on where in the world you are. Happy World Usability Day to everyone. My name is Matt, and I am one of the directors at Cyberduck, and I'm going to be your host for this session. Cyberduck are a user experience and technology-focused digital transformation agency, and as an agency, we strive for every experience we create to be inclusive and accessible because we believe it's the right thing to do. Now, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to and choosing to join us today for this roundtable. Today, we're going to be chatting about accessibility and usability. We're going to be exploring some of the controversy surrounding companies promoting automated accessibility and more specifically overlay solutions, and why accessibility and usability are so important in user experience and web design. Now, before we start, a little bit of housekeeping from me. First, we've been joined by Lynn and Michaela, who are British Sign Language interpreters. So if you need to, you can pin them on your screen by clicking on the 3 dots on their video and selecting the pin screen option. Live captioning is also being provided. If it hasn't been automatically turned on for you, and if you need it, you can switch this on by using the live transcript button located at the bottom of the Zoom interface and selecting the show subtitle option. We're also recording this session, and everybody who's signed up will receive an email next week, providing them with access to the on-demand video version of the session. Okay, that's all of the housekeeping out of the way. So now on to the session itself. I doubt it surprises most of you that the vast majority of digital service products today still fail basic accessibility requirements. As I mentioned in our last roundtable, a study by WebAIM as recently as 2019 found that 98% of the top 1 million web pages failed to conform with WCAG or WCAG and ADA. That being said, in the last few years, there's been an increased attention and focus on web accessibility, with more businesses paying attention to WCAG and ADA and giving real attention and investment in creating more inclusive online experiences. Not surprising when you consider that just in the UK, nearly 1 in 5 people have a disability that limits their daily activities, according to the ONS. Now, to do this, some organisations have opted for third-party solutions known as overlays. And overlay tools work by detecting accessibility issues and attempting to repair them in real time. And quite often they can be sold as quick fix, cost-effective solutions to make a website compliant and more usable for disabled people. However, some of these overlays, I think it's fair to say, have come under quite a bit of scrutiny, and I think it's also fair to say criticism by both the accessibility and UX communities, as well as disabled people. A recent example of this was the backlash that the Paralympics 2020 hashtag #WeThe15 campaign experienced with their website when it launched, which was found to have basic accessibility issues, but also they were using an overlay when it first launched. Now, to their credit, they quickly made changes and following the community feedback, but it goes to show that if campaigns specifically aimed at raising awareness around accessibility and inclusion could struggle to get this right, then what chance have the rest of us got? So that's why we're talking about that today. So with that in mind, I have a brilliant expert panel with me today, and they're going to help us navigate the dangers on relying on overlays and discuss the principles and process of creating great, accessible and inclusive products and services, and how sometimes inclusion and usability is more than just ticking a box or ticking WCAG accessibility criteria. So before I introduce our panelists, previous attendees of our roundtable webinars will know that our webinars are really all about audience participation. It's all about you. So I'd like to ask you, the audience, to get involved in this roundtable as much as possible. So if you've got a burning question about accessibility, perhaps a challenge that you're currently facing in your own organization or a project that you're involved in, we'd love to hear it. So please pop your question in the Q&A section. There's a button at the bottom of the Zoom interface for Q&A. And I will do my best to make sure that your questions get put to our panel of experts. Alternatively, if Twitter is more your thing, please pop your questions on Twitter using the hashtag A11YDuck. That's A11YDuck on Twitter, and I'll be keeping an eye on that too. So now to introduce our fantastic panelists. We have with us today, we have Holly Schroeder, a UX and accessibility expert who's working within the health tech industry. Neil Milliken, who is Global Head of Accessibility for Atos. We have Karen Lowness Gamble, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, the founder and director of KreativeInc Agency. And last but by no means least, Cyberduck's very own Ramon Lapenta, a front-end technical lead. So let's get into it. Starting with yourself, Holly, please tell us a little bit about yourselves in 1 to 2 minutes and why this topic really matters to you.
I think the quickest reason to say why it matters to me is I'm a disabled user. So I take the topic very personally for myself and for other disabled folks out there. We are increasingly dependent on digital solutions to conduct just normal daily activities, and things like equal access in digital space have risen to a human rights issue. And so I think it's tremendously important. And I'm a UX researcher at a healthcare company.
Thanks, Holly. Over to yourself, Neil.
So yeah, I'm Neil Milliken. I'm VP Head of Accessibility at Atos. We're a global systems integrator, a digital transformation company in 74 countries, 105,000 employees. We do all kinds of digital services. Accessibility is important to me because I too have skin in the game. I've got a couple of hidden disabilities. I'm dyslexic and ADHD. And I've been playing around with assistive technology, calling it work for the last couple of decades.
Thanks, Neil. And over to you, Karen.
Yes, hi, I'm Karen. I'm co-founder of KreativeInc Agency. I started KreativeInc Agency in 2019 with my son Callum, who is autistic, after a bad employment experience that he had. And we went we started our own business really to take a positive opportunity from a bad situation. And we are web accessibility experts in that we do audits and consultancy. And we come very much, although we have the whole breadth of disability that we audit for, we very much come from a neurodivergent angle. And the overlay topic is a topic that we are very passionate about, because we actually come from a perspective where we did use overlays and then have learned that they are really not the right way of going about this. So we have turned 180 degrees. We are against overlays now, and just for designing, starting design accessibility products right from scratch.
Thanks, Karen. I think we'll touch on that a little bit more in the session. I think that's really interesting, your background there. And like I said before, last but by no means least, Ramon.
Yeah, my name is Ramon, and I've been front-end developer for about 20 years, and been at Cyberduck for around about 10 years now. My interest in accessibility comes from a variety of sources, including seeing friends and loved ones struggle with using digital products everywhere, and also being put in a position at Cyberduck where I am able to not only learn, but apply the knowledge and share the knowledge with the rest of the team made me more passionate about it for the last couple of years.
Thanks, everyone. So let's get into this topic. I'd like to start by talking about these automated accessibility tools and this concept of automated accessibility. I mean, how do we define overlays? Do these differ to other available accessibility automation tools out there? I'll go to yourself, Neil, for this one.
Okay, so I think that there are a number of slightly different types of tools out there. So there are toolbars and plugins that you can use. So there are things, so firstly, browsers contain assistive technology in them these days. So if you go to your Edge browser, it's got text-to-speech and a number of other accessibility features built in, as has Chrome. So assistive tech is sort of becoming everywhere, aside from the assistive tech that disabled people have traditionally used to access their computers and the web. What has happened over a number of years is that there have been people have been unaware of the technologies, and so people have created these toolbars initially that people could add to their websites, which would give assistive features. Those have sort of developed along a couple of divergent paths. One is that these are things that are sort of an addition to the website, and others have been marketed as something that sort of acts as middleware essentially, and scrapes your website and presents a different layer, claiming that it can then fix the accessibility issues in the underlying website. And I think that the ire of the community of people with disabilities and the accessibility professionals has really been directed at those, because those things have been marketed as a quick fix cure-all, and actually quite often they don't fix things. They can create additional barriers in terms of interoperability with assistive technology, and they're leading to customers of some of these providers being sued. Now, that's pretty problematic. At the same time, we have to respect the idea that not everybody that would benefit from having something read out to them, or from text being made larger, knowing about the capabilities of their operating system or their browser. So sometimes adding features that enable a customer or a user to change things on a site may benefit some users. So it's not completely black and white. That said, I think that the way that things have been marketed, where essentially it's sold as a cure-all, drop in this line of code, your accessibility compliance is done, and then it's a legal compliance issue, that's disingenuous, and therefore that's really, really problematic. So I don't advocate using these tools. I do understand why organizations have been attracted to them. They're sold as this is the cure to your problem. If you don't know any better, and these companies are spending big money on marketing, then you're going to be attracted to this thinking, well, I need to do this. A lot of the customers are implementing these tools, and they're buying these tools with all of the right intentions, right? And that is that they wish to serve the disability community. There is a certain amount of, well, if I can do this really easily, then great. But that is human nature, right? So this is not unique to accessibility, people wanting to find an easy way of doing something. And I don't think that we can say that forever overlays or plug-in tools or automation or artificial intelligence will always be bad and always fail. It's just not good enough yet, and it's being sold as being good enough. So I think when we were discussing in our preview call, it's a bit like giving a sticking plaster for someone that's cut their arm off. It's not the appropriate solution. So best thing to do, make your website accessible, code it simply, follow the web content accessibility guidelines, work with people that know what they're doing, build with and in partnership with the disabled community.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Neil, in that I think it's human nature that we are drawn towards quick fixes sometimes. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a slender tone sitting in the bottom of my wardrobe gathering dust. how do we know when a website has an overlay? What are the signs that a website has an overlay? Maybe Karen, you obviously have experience. You've got, like you said, you've got skin in the game here. How do we know?
Usually you see a little icon in the corner of the website showing the accessibility sign or a wheelchair, and then you click on it and a user interface comes up that sort of covers half the screen. And on there you can set your preferences with regards to font size, colors, backgrounds. Also, it's supposedly working with screen readers, so that screen readers can easily navigate the website. But it's just specific for that particular website, and you actually have to click off it to make it go away again. But the changes are still there. So the thing with these user interfaces are that they can be very disruptive. They cover quite a lot of the website, and you won't be able to see it. And I believe that as a blind user, it can severely interfere with your assistive technology that you're used to. So you're actually excluding that particular user from using your website. So that is, I would say, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, and do you mind sharing a little bit more? You mentioned at the top about the fact that you had used overlays before. I mean, do you mind telling us a bit about sort of your journey with that?
Yes, absolutely. The thing was that Callum and I, we started off as web developers and not knowing anything about accessibility, because although Callum went to university, it was mentioned in passing and not taught. So really, we didn't know much about accessibility. Callum had struggled on websites with text, reading text, and as an autistic person, where the text just started swimming. He couldn't concentrate on websites that were full of content flashing at him, and that really bothered me as well. So we knew there were issues, and then we discovered we came actually to Accessibility via Neil Patel, and as a content writer, I always sort of refer a lot to Neil Patel with regards to search engine optimization. And so I thought he was a trusted source. And he had Accessibility on his website. So I tried it out. I showed it to Callum, and he said, oh, wow, I can change the colors. I can make the text bigger. And he said, I love this. And so we came to Accessibility that in that way, and then we installed it, and we became partners for Accessibility, because you can become a free partner. You get quite a good incentive of selling the overlay on, which we didn't do, by the way. We never sold it because we very quickly discovered a lot of problems. And that was that one of our clients said, what have you got on your website? I can't get into it anymore. Firefox says you've got a Trojan. So, and that turned out to be Accessibility when Callum actually went into it to check it. And the next thing was that there were various issues that you actually could not use the interface properly, because it just kept popping up, and you could not, the keyboard navigation was off. It was terrible. So we contacted their support that totally ignored us, and there was absolutely no support whatsoever. And then we decided, no, we're not going to, use this anymore. And at the same time, we got messages from the accessibility community to say, how can you promote yourself as people that are for accessibility by having Accessibility on your website? And so that sort of set the alarm bells ringing. We started researching it, and then we started taking our qualifications for accessibility, and that turned everything completely around. And we decided to go absolutely against overlays, because every overlay is operating on the same basis, really. And we understood as well that really that overlays are there as a tick box exercise, but not as the process that is required for true accessibility. And also accessibility is about people, because websites are used by people and not by robots. And therefore that's where the overlays fall down as well, because they are just saying, oh yeah, we scan your website, we change it. But then when in effect, when you come as a user, you cannot use it. And certain users are even excluded, like I said, with screen reader users that have conflicts there. So all in all, we really had a very steep learning curve. But I always say accessibility is also about making mistakes and learning from them and being open to feedback and changing things and making adjustments. So I feel that even though we came, into accessibility in a bit of a crooked way, it has actually done us, the world of good.
Yeah, that's a really interesting background there, Karen. There's a really good question in the chat, which is, what about those businesses that do not have the funds to remediate an existing site? So let's say you're a non-profit or a charity, for example. What would you use, if anything, for a lower cost option for those clients or businesses to implement accessibility improvements? Can I come to you, Holly, for this one?
I would say I would get familiar with WCAG and look at how you can start to apply some of those guidelines and principles. You can also reach out to the community for support. There are tomes of information and tons of helpful people who are happy to share information about how to make things more accessible. I mean, there's people like me and people like Karen and Neil and Ramon who, are happy to share information just for the asking, and there's plenty already published. So not having a big budget to me is, and I'm not picking on the person who asked the question, but it's kind of a flimsy excuse, because the information is just as easily available as a set of encyclopedias at the library. It's available for everyone. That said, you can also do yourself a favor and get in touch with agencies that are advocates for disabled users and get to know them and ask them, can you come tour their facility and see the kind of assistive technology that's being used? There's lots of videos and training on how to use those assistive technologies. I mean, maybe more of a process of self-education, but it's absolutely possible. And there's some kind of big things that you can cross off the list that are going to help out a lot of disabled folks, like making sure that your website can be navigated with a keyboard only. I'm one of those people. I have a degenerative brain disease that causes tremors. And so sometimes the mouse is not my friend and I need to use just the keyboard. There are also always web and UX students looking for project work. I mean, if you get creative, there are lots of ways that you can address it that don't have to cost a lot of money. And I'm not suggesting that you should ask disabled people to do work for free. I don't think that's the right answer, but there's definitely plenty of information available. If you just look, you just have to look for it.
Thanks, Holly. Ramon and Karen, I can see you both patiently have your hand up there using Zoom's hands up feature. Ramon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, to extend a little bit of that question for Denise in the chat, we obviously understand there might be quite a few issues that are too technical for the content editors to fix. But I think the first step is, like Holly said, getting yourself familiarized with what is needed on the site is one of the most important things that you will do for your organization. And the other important thing that I wanted to mention is that thinking of using an overlay to fix a site that has issues, an existing site, may not give you the result that you're expecting, because a lot of the issues are simply not going to be resolved automatically. So it, depending on your requirement, especially a legal requirement of your organization to be accessible, having one of those tools is not gonna solve your problem. There is very likely to be a cost, but I think it's important for any organization, no matter their profit nature, to start thinking about accessibility as the same way as you think about hosting, for example. You have to pay for hosting. If not, you don't have a website. Accessibility should be as important as that. And maybe when you start thinking about it that way, then the cost part of the accessibility work, it starts getting ingrained into the whole process of how the website comes to exist. It is important, and there are ways to solve the issues.
Thanks, Ramon. Karen, over to you.
Yeah, I think that you should start, if you haven't got the budget, you should start with seeing it as a mindset and really change everything, how you think about your online presence, change that to accommodate people. And you don't have to do that initially with code, you can do it with an open conversation. And with that, you can write an accessibility statement. You can find a template on the W3C website. If you put into Google W3C template for accessibility statement, and from them it's an easy guide to follow, and on there you will list what your website can do, and you can check it with the tools. I think Neil has already provided some links, and then you can actually go and say, you can do that on our website, but you can't do that. But if you want us to help you, please contact us under this number, on this email address, and just start an open conversation and start somewhere. I think most people are put off because they think it is so expensive and they think it is just so technical. But accessibility actually is a mindset, and you can change your mindset and you can do it bit by bit. You don't need to do it all in one go. Just, also if you want to do the technical changes, ask your web developer to do it bit by bit, so at a rate that you can afford. And it is just start somewhere, and it will, like slowly then get you onto the accessibility journey, and you will get there.
Thanks, Karen. Neil, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of really small organizations outsource the creation of their websites, and that makes it more difficult to implement some of those changes, and that might be the point at which it looks like it's going to be more expensive. There are a number of things that you can do when you're thinking about refreshing your website. You can think about whether or not you want to continue with a provider that hasn't delivered you an accessible site in the first place. And you may decide that actually there's more that you can do yourself, because there are quite a lot of tools these days that allow you to put together simple websites, at least through things like WordPress and Drupal, which come with accessibility ready templates, right? So these hosting platforms, they also have content management in them, and quite a lot of these actually have workflows in them that allow you to create that accessible content. So if you're uploading an image to WordPress, there's part of that process which is prompting you that you need to add a description to your image. So you can incrementally improve things as you go along, or you could choose a different template. There's quite a few things that you can do that don't cost money. And actually, if you've paid for a website recently and someone hasn't delivered accessibility, I would be, actually having a word with them about that, because if you've paid them and they've delivered something that essentially is in breach of regulations, then they need to be fixing it for you.
Yeah, I agree, Neil. I don't think there's any excuse for it these days. Ironically, at the COP26 forum, there was quite a big news story where there was a wheelchair user who wasn't able to actually get into that conference. And that was front page news about the inaccessibility of that conference. I've not done an audit of their website. I'd wonder if their website is also has the same issues. And if not, then why is that not also front page news? It's an interesting one. Holly, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so I think everyone else added on really fantastic points. Karen talking about it being a mindset. I had a chance to read through the chat, and someone had said, making all the changes is just like way too technical. And I understand that, it's probably more technical acumen to make it, to go the full distance on your own. But if you look at that Web AAM study, and like the top 3 things that came up as issues in that audit, it was like missing alt text, which anybody can do. You're just adding text to an image, or links that weren't meaningful. So instead of like a document, you never want to say click here, because when the screen reader gets to it, it just says the here. It doesn't tell them what they're going to. So you want to actually give it a meaningful title. Or worse, if you put in the link, then it reads the whole long file name. Same thing for images. If you don't put in that alt text, it reads whatever gobbledygook your file name is. So those are in the heading order, the semantic order in your code. So heading 1, 2, making sure that those are in order. That's like Web 101. Those aren't difficult things for people to learn, or to learn how to do, or learning how to inspect code in the browser. I could teach you how to do it in 2 or 3 minutes, so you could see, making sure that your font sizes are meeting standard. And Neil linked you to some tools. There's, Wave, Axe, there's these different plugins that you can put in your browser, and you can run it. And it's not perfect, but at least it's going to get you moving in the right direction. And there is no website that's going to be 100% accessible for everybody all the time. But you do want to be always trying to move that direction. And like many things, it's an iterative process. And I think Karen made a great point that, like, hey, we're a work in progress. If you see an opportunity for improvement, please let us know. As a disabled user, that's all I want. When I go to an event, if somebody doesn't have live transcript, I'll explain it, how they can turn it on. It's a standard feature to all professional Zoom accounts. If they can't figure it out, as long as they're like, I'm really, I apologize, I'll make sure that's taken care of going forward, I'm happy. Now they know, and they're going to do it. But if I get blown off, that's really upsetting. Or like you were talking about the conference, couldn't get through the front door. That is the experience for a lot of disabled users at a website. They can't get through the front door again and again and again and again. COVID with the vaccines was a good example. Many in the US, many of the websites that were hosted by various government entities at the state level were not accessible for blind users. And not accessible on a lot of fronts, but particularly for blind users. And they weren't even able to access the website to get information about where to go, how to register, and had to have the assistance of another person to actually get registered. I mean, this is a life-saving vaccine that all the other layers of complication for transportation and all that other stuff layered on top of it. I mean, you talk about people were refreshing their screens every 30 seconds because it was a battle to get registered for a vaccine. And if you were a blind user, forget it. Not happening, you know, completely cut off. And so I think that, you know, it really, it does matter and it's important. So if you're making that effort, that also matters.
Mm, mm. So I think it's really important point. Is in some cases, in many cases, it's not just a massive inconvenience. It's a matter of life and death. So I think you know, in that, and you know, the disabled community has been disproportionately affected by COVID. So I think that's a really good example. I'm going to come to the question in the Q&A because I think this is a really interesting question, which is, I'm going to read it out. So the organization they work for, which is non-profit, government funded, regional representative for agencies working in a certain sector, they recently held their annual conference online for the second time ever. And the event conference organizer selected the same online platform as the previous year. And what they noticed was that there was an overlay that was included in the UI this year. So after doing some quick testing and finding obviously many issues, a request was made to the event organizer to get rid of that overlay, to turn it off. But before they got around to it, they were requested to assist somebody with a disability register for the event, and found that the overlay was actually more useful than a hindrance to that user. So as such, they made the decision to leave the overlay on for the event, with the condition that it only be mentioned if somebody asks you about it. I mean, what are your thoughts regarding that? Is there an argument sometimes for overlays augment, if you follow good accessibility practice, is there an argument for overlays augmenting that, you know, good practice or not? I don't know. Question. I can see Neil's got his hand up. Over to you, Neil.
So this is I think the thing where sometimes we talk about things being overlays when they might be toolbars. And my view is, if it doesn't interfere with assistive technology, then it's okay, right? The issue is when it starts to interfere with the assistive technology and it's getting in the way of people's normal user experience that they would expect, then it becomes problematic. As I explained before, lots of people don't use assistive tech that might need to, but haven't heard about it. So there can be benefits to having assistive features built into products and so on. So it's not a black and white situation. I think that what is black and white is when you're overselling something as the cure for everything. I think that different contexts and different people using even in the same context may have different needs, and therefore the applicability of whether or not a toolbar or a built-in bit of assistive technology is worth having depends on the situation. So it's not all inbuilt assistive tech is bad. It's really, well, does it interfere with other people's usability experiences?
Ramon, you've got your hand up, but you're on mute.
If I unmute myself. Yeah, I think it's important to understand that the different toolbars and overlays are not the same. There is a lot of them, and each one of them will do something different. But there is a delicate balance between what a particular tool is trying to achieve against what the problem of the actual website is, mixed up with whatever the person with a disability is facing as an issue on that website. For example, if the only problem that a person has on a particular website is that the text is too small, and there is a tool that is allowing that user to augment the size of the text, yeah, you can say maybe there is a help or a benefit of that. But the tools and overlays, they don't know what things mean on the site. They cannot know what things mean. So there's going to be a lot of other situations where those tools are not going to be able to solve a particular user's issue. So because in one particular case, one of those tools was beneficial for that user on that website, doesn't mean that they are going to be the same for all users on all websites.
Thanks, Ramon. Holly.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a researcher, an N of 1 always makes me a little nervous, you know, that it worked well for one person. I think it's important to also think a little bit bigger. We also have the digital divide to deal with. Where are your users? Because if there are any users outside of a major metropolitan area, they probably have no access or limited access to high-speed internet. And things like overlays or any additional drain is going to cause system lag. And so that can be a really frustrating situation where people overkey and it looks like they have click rage and then they don't know what's going on. And it can end up causing more problems. I was recently out of town, only about an hour and a half from my home, and I live in a major metropolitan area, and my upload speed was less than 1 megabyte per second, and my download was 0.05 megabytes per second. I couldn't even get video to play. So if I had tried to visit a website that had a third party, you know, it's usually a third party service that's providing the overlay, any of those additional things, it would just be unusable just because of the additional drain. It was slowing it down. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I normally would. So I think it's important to look, you know, people who are disabled users have, you know, the digital divide to contend with, but then there's this additional layer with accessibility that exists, and things like, you know, tools that could slow things down a bit or overlays that could really slow things down a lot. Any of those extra things can interfere with the tools working properly.
I think that's a really interesting angle and point there. Like you said, accessibility isn't perhaps always about disability either. Or maybe it's a wider thing about inclusion, and performance is a big part of that. If people don't have good internet connections, then its very nature of being excluded. And like you said, the assistive tools, if there's a latency issue, that's just going to serve to frustrate those users. So I think that's an interesting point. I mean, we've talked about overlays a little bit, and it feels like from some of the discussions just before, maybe not all overlays are the same, and maybe some are better than others, or are they all bad? I don't know. What's the panel's thoughts on that? I'll come to you, Neil. I'll put you on the spot with this one.
Okay. Well, as I've said before, I don't think that they're necessarily inherently evil. If they don't interfere with the assistive technology and they give benefit to another user, then they're not all bad. That said, a lot of them do interfere with assistive technology. They break the user experience for a lot of people with disabilities, and therefore that is a real problem, especially when they're being marketed as being the solution. That is bad. So I think that there is potential for the technology to get significantly better. It's very immature at the moment. You know, lots of the stuff that is being done is automated image descriptions, as Ramon has alluded to. Those image descriptions that are generated that make a site quote unquote compliant don't make it meaningful or usable. So that said, you know, we know that automatic captions were really, really terrible a few years ago. They've got a heck of a lot better. So we mustn't be so close-minded to think that there will never be a day when we can automatically remediate errors on a website. We're just not there yet, and we shouldn't be selling any solution that says that it's capable, because they're not.
So the danger is perhaps more in how they're being sold, and perhaps
Absolutely.
giving people who are not necessarily educated on accessibility the false impression that it's solving things that perhaps it cannot.
Correct.
I'm going to come to you, Karen. You've had your hand up for a moment.
Yes. What I wanted to say is that, you know, they are not necessarily bad in themselves, because technological advance is great, and you know, like, people should always try to do better things, and like we all agreed that as human beings we love to make things as easy as possible for us. But like Neil said, if they are sold as a magic tool, that is bad. And also they are actually in most cases a luxury that is not needed, because everything that you need and that they give you is already in your hardware on the browsers. And if you are educated enough, you can, you know, as a disabled user, most people have already set it up for themselves, how they like to browse the net, and other people should be educated that you don't need to pay for this. You can actually use what is on your browser, what is on your hardware, and also, please don't spend the money on having an overlay when you can spend that money bit for bit to have your website made accessible, or, you know, like, invested into a new design that is inherently accessible. So that is my take on overlays.
Okay, and Ramon?
Just extending a
mute,
little bit
yeah.
from what both Neil and Karen said. I think I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that I see happening is that using an overlay or deciding to try to solve your accessibility issues with an overlay further extends the idea that you don't have to do the work. And I think that is a very dangerous way of thinking about accessibility. Not having to do the work. I'm just going to pay for this and put this in, and I'm done, which is not the case. And the other part, I think you can do a lot by just explaining how things are done. Karen just said, just if you're educated to know how to use certain tools that you already have, you can go a long way about being more accessible. But then we can go a little bit further and then have, for example, instead of adding a tool, we can add a page where we explain to the user how to do certain things, how to turn on a Chrome's voice out loud, I can't recall what it's called, how to do certain things that the browser already is providing to the user in a very easy way for them. I think that can go a long way and is very, very easy to implement.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, I think it was you, Karen, mentioned, you know, you need to have more of an accessibility mindset. Well, I mean, what does that mean? What does that look like in organizations? What can they start doing to have this accessibility mindset?
Shall I answer that?
Yeah, yeah, go for it. Yeah, because you mentioned it earlier, so I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, for me, it starts with actually sitting down and, you know, discussing who do we not want to exclude from our website. And that is a good starting point, because we're always talking about, like target audiences, and we want to talk to these particular people. And but then within that target audience, there are disabled people. So, and we are excluding them. So sit down and write down, who do we not want to exclude from our target audience? And I think you very quickly come to that mindset that there are dyslexic people, that there are autistic people, that there are blind people, that there are people that have a neurological conditions where they can't, take flushing things and have seizures. There's a physical impairments where you can't use a mouse or trackpad, like Holly said. You need to just think about these people, that they are part of your target audience. Whether you are a dog breeder that sells to other dog breeders, there are disabled dog breeders, there are dyslexic dog breeders, and just think about them as well. And then sit down and think, how can we make it easier for them? And then you can very easily research what you should do on your website and make the easy changes that are not too technical yourselves. There are plenty of resources out there. And then bit by bit do the technical changes with your developer, or get somebody in who audits your website and then gives you a roadmap, so to speak, on, or your developer a roadmap on how to do it, and add a consultancy element to it, like we do. We work with web developers to guide them on the job how to do it, and then the next time they know what to do. It's really not rocket science, is web accessibility. That's what we have found. Once we immersed ourselves in it, we very quickly learned how to do it, and it became standard thinking for us. Standard as how we designed and developed websites, and it became part of the process.
Over to you, Holly.
Oh, so I was thinking about what Karen was saying, and I think that shifting to an inclusive mindset where it's just baked into the process. And Ramon was talking about this, and I think that and Neil too, that the potential danger of things like overlays or tools is that you're ignoring the root cause. Why do you need this thing to begin with, right? So let's look at where the real problem is, and is that something that we can do something about? That's my primary concern as well, is that sort of short-sighted thinking, not looking what's the long game. And usually if you look at the long game, it's going to cost you a lot more to go back and fix all that stuff. Accessible code is really just clean, well-written code. It's not special in some way, but it's taught like it's this add-on. And I think that mindset is to stop talking about it like it's an add-on, that it's just standard to the process. And I think something else that's important too is to start getting familiar with what are the stories, because that's how we transform users into people, right? Like, so what kinds of disabilities are there? What does that mean? How does that, two people, I have essential tremor is the name of one of my disabilities. So somebody else who has the same exact medical diagnosis as me may have a totally different experience in life than I do. They may have a different set of tremors. They may have a different set of needs when using computers. The disease can express itself in lots of different ways. And that's true for most disabilities. Even two people with the exact same diagnosis, two people with autism, don't necessarily need the same accommodation. So I think, one, ask people what they need. Don't make assumptions. That's a great way to learn what kinds of accommodations do people need. I have a friend who is deaf, and often people will invite her to speak. She's pretty well known in her field, and they assume that she needs an ASL interpreter. She does not. She needs captions. She doesn't sign. She doesn't know ASL. So I think to stop making assumptions and start asking questions and be okay with being a little uncomfortable. I think anytime you're going to go on a journey where you're learning new things and you want to normalize something, because people still talk about disability the way that they talk about race. They're like, oh, he has X, but he's not like those people who have X. You know, it's still that talked about in a very othered sort of way. We need to stop that. It's 20% of humans. It's 1 billion people on the planet. It's not out there. We're right here. And so to make a psychologically safe space at work where people are allowed to talk about those things, and it's okay to ask questions. And if your question isn't perfectly formed, give a little bit of grace to the other person. I can tell when someone's asking me a question and the intent is good and when they're being a jerk. It's not that hard to suss out, you know? And if the question isn't asked perfectly, that's okay. That's just an opportunity for me to let them know for next time, you know? So I feel like it takes both sides to participate, but that requires that I have a psychologically safe space to do that. And I can't provide that. Only my employer can. Only the people that I work with can.
I think I think that's a really good place to wrap up there. I think that was some really powerful points there, Holly. I can't remember whether it was on this panel or maybe in a previous discussion, but I remember, and I think it might be you, Karen, mentioned, you might not be able to make things 100% accessible all of the time, but you can be 100% intentional with the right intentions about making things accessible 100% of the time. And I really liked that. And I think that's maybe a good takeaway for us all to wrap up with today. Before we do go, I've got a couple of quick parish notices from me. First, I just want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists. I think you've been really excellent today, and I hope everybody will join me in the chat in thanking them for imparting their knowledge and expertise and experiences with us today. Really appreciate that. And secondly, our audience, thank you again for the questions, for the activity in the chat, but also just for joining us, choosing to spend your time with us this afternoon. Really appreciate that. You are what makes our events great, in my completely unbiased opinion. So as I mentioned at the start, we've been recording this session, so everybody who's signed up will receive an email in the next week providing them with access to the on-demand video. Please do feel free to share that video with your colleagues and partners. The more we spread the word about accessibility, the better. We'll be planning another accessibility roundtable for early next year in 2022. So please do follow us for announcements on that. We'd love to have you along for our next event. And also, if you have ideas for people that you would like to see or include on our future roundtables, please do share them. We love when our participants share ideas for panelists with us. So with that, that's everything from me. So once again, thank you for joining us, and a big thank you to Holly, Neil, Ramon, and Karen. You've all been great, and that's it. Bye for now from us. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you, everybody.